Terror on the Nile. The Nile River sparkled beneath the setting sun, a ribbon of gold weaving through the heart of Egypt. The Sphinx Majesty, a luxurious cruise ship, glided effortlessly over its waters, ferrying a small group of tourists eager to experience ancient history along the legendary river. It was meant to be a serene journey, ancient tombs by day, lavish dinners by night. But beneath the tranquil surface of the river lurked not just the crocodiles in its murky depths, but something far more sinister on board. There were 10 passengers in total, each with their own quirks and eccentricities. Richard, a retired lawyer, his wife Evelyn, a quiet but sharp-eyed woman, and their daughter Claire, a recent university graduate, made up a family of 3. Then there was Victor, a middle-aged architect with an odd, almost suspicious personality. He had a habit of keeping to himself, lurking in the background during group tours. The young couple, Mia and Oliver, were there on their honeymoon, looking out of place, with their youthful enthusiasm amidst the older passengers. Lastly, there were Helen, a solo traveler and avid photographer, Samuel, a historian fascinated by the Nile's role in Egypt's mythology, and John, a gregarious Australian adventurer. On the first night of the cruise, after dinner, the group gathered on the ship's deck to watch the stars. The Nile's calm waters reflected the night sky, casting an almost surreal glow across the surroundings. As they admired the stars, Richard and Claire pointed out a crocodile swimming near the ship's edge, its eyes glowing in the dim light. "Did you know that the ancient Egyptians believed crocodiles were the guardians of the underworld?" Samuel said, breaking the silence. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but Victor, standing at the edge of the group, chuckled darkly. "Fitting, don't you think? After all, this river is full of death." The comment lingered in the air like a bad omen, leaving the group with an unsettling feeling. Little did they know, that was just the beginning. The first night, Helen's disappearance. Later that night, Helen wandered off alone, her camera slung around her neck. She was known for staying up late, chasing the perfect photograph. No one thought much of it when they didn't see her in the lounge afterward. The next morning, Helen was nowhere to be found. Her cabin was empty, her camera missing, and the only sign of her was her hat, discovered at the railing of the ship's deck. Panic set in quickly as the passengers and crew realized she was gone. Had she fallen overboard? Evelyn was the first to speak up. She wouldn't just disappear like that. Someone had to have seen her. Samuel was more practical. The Nile is dangerous at night. Maybe she leaned too far over the edge. But Victor's eyes lingered on the spot where her hat was found, his face betraying no emotion. "Or maybe," he said slowly, "someone pushed her." The captain announced that they would search the riverbanks for any signs of Helen. Yet deep down, everyone knew it was hopeless. The river had claimed its first victim. The atmosphere on the Sphinx Majesty shifted. What had once been an exciting vacation turned into a claustrophobic nightmare. The ship continued its journey, but the mood was somber. Each passenger became suspicious of the others. Whispered conversations filled the halls, and eyes darted around nervously. That night, Claire woke from a nightmare, her body drenched in sweat. She had dreamt of a figure standing over her, watching her in the dark. She sat up, heart racing, and listened. There was no sound other than the soft lapping of the river against the ship's hull. Shaking off the unease, she glanced at her watch. It was just past midnight. Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, Claire crept out of bed and made her way onto the deck. The ship was silent, except for the creaks and groans of wood and metal. As she leaned against the railing, staring into the darkness, she thought she heard something. A faint splash, as if something, or someone, had fallen into the water. Her heart pounded. She strained her eyes, scanning the inky black surface of the river. And then she saw it, a shadowy figure moving quickly along the deck, vanishing into the dark corners of the ship. Claire ran back to her cabin and locked the door behind her, her mind racing. She wanted to tell someone, but feared sounding paranoid. Had she really seen something, or was her imagination running wild? The next morning, the tension on the ship had only grown worse. Breakfast was a quiet affair, with most of the passengers sitting in uneasy silence. Mia was the only one missing. Concerned, Claire knocked on her cabin door, but there was no response. A sense of dread filled her as she realized that something was terribly wrong. The crew searched Mia's room and found it in disarray. There were signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, torn sheets, and Mia's phone lay cracked on the floor. Worse still, the balcony door was open, and from it hung a torn piece of fabric, fluttering in the breeze. Her husband Oliver was devastated, but it wasn't until that evening that the true horror of her disappearance came to light. Oliver, desperate to find his wife, spent hours pacing the deck, calling her name into the night. The river answered him only with silence. And then, it happened. Just after midnight, as the others slept, a scream tore through the stillness. Oliver was thrown overboard. Claire saw it happen from her cabin window. She rushed out, but was too late. By the time she reached the deck, Oliver's body had disappeared beneath the crocodile-infested waters. She stood frozen in horror as the shadows beneath the river churned, the water disturbed by something unseen, something hungry. Now, the ship felt like a prison. The remaining passengers were gripped by fear, knowing that someone among them was responsible for the deaths. They gathered together, but the air was thick with distrust. "I saw someone moving around last night," Claire finally confessed. "I don't know who it was, but it wasn't a crew member." Victor leaned forward, his cold eyes locked on her. "So you're saying you were spying on us?" "No," Claire stammered. Enough," Richard snapped. "This is madness. We need to stay together and figure out who's behind this." Samuel, who had remained quiet for most of the trip, stepped forward. "It has to be someone who knows the ship, someone who's familiar with the layout and knows when and how to strike." The group exchanged looks, each one silently accusing the other. As night fell, the passengers gathered in the ship's lounge, determined to stay together until dawn. It was the only way they could ensure their safety, but the tension was unbearable. Richard kept his eye on Victor, who remained eerily calm throughout the evening. Claire, however, couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her instincts told her to stay alert, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her. In the early hours of the morning, just when everyone thought they were safe, a loud crash echoed through the ship. Claire jumped to her feet, adrenaline surging through her. What was that? The group rushed out onto the deck, where they found the ship's railing smashed and the telltale marks of a struggle. The only one missing was Samuel. "Where is he?" Mia screamed. "Where is Samuel?" But they all knew. Samuel had been thrown overboard, another victim of the killer's sick game. Claire looked at the others in horror. There were only 5 of them left now. The truth unveiled by dawn, the ship had reached a docking point, but there was no time to celebrate. The captain had been alerted to the murders, and the local authorities were waiting for them on shore. However, before the investigation could even begin, Victor, who had remained unsettlingly silent all morning, finally spoke up. "They'll never find him," he said, a twisted smile spreading across his face. "He's gone, just like the others." Claire's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Victor turned to her, his eyes filled with madness. "The river takes what it wants, and I just helped it along." It was then that Claire realized the horrifying truth. Victor was the killer. He had been the one throwing people overboard, that feeding them to the crocodiles under the cover of night. The twisted satisfaction in his voice made her stomach churn. But before Victor could react, Richard tackled him to the ground, pinning him down until the authorities arrived. The nightmare was over, but the terror would haunt them forever. As Victor was led away in handcuffs, the remaining passengers stood in stunned silence. The Sphinx Majesty had survived its voyage, but it would forever be tainted by the blood of those who didn't make it to the end.